I'd like to thank you, of course, for being here today in this usual setting. To begin with, I'd like to make a comment about the plenary session, and I'd like to congratulate Manfred Weber for his re-election as leader of the European People's Party. In addition, of course, I hope that Manfred Weber's new mandate as leader of the EPP will be based on European spirit, the pro-European alliance, and defending our common values. What is challenging or difficult is, on the one hand, to call for this pro-European alliance, and then on the other hand, to allow the European People's Party to strike alliances with the far right, those who wish to bring the European project to its knees. Of course, the choice of Valencia as the place for holding that Congress is showing the alliance between the EPP and the far right. Therefore, I think it's vital for us to be consistent when we put messaging out there for citizens. We need to listen to citizens, and we need to defend Europe. Europe is defended by placing a barrier, a cordon sanitaire, against the far right. This is something that the EPP and Valencia are not doing. We can think back to the latest agreement struck between EPP and Vox in Valencia, where the agenda is one leaning far right, and it goes against the environmental agenda. It stands against NGOs and civil society, and it goes against all of those values that we believe to be fundamental. As such, despite these best wishes that I direct in his direction at the beginning of this new mandate, I wish that he defends Europe, and I hope that he will be consistent. We will always stand ready to negotiate. But I want to say one thing. Negotiate does not mean abdicating. It does not mean accepting everything that other people impose. We are different. We have different positions on many different policies, and we need to be able to sit down at a table together to negotiate. But we need to be able to negotiate on our word and negotiate policies. I'd like to begin this press briefing by also congratulating the new government in Germany, which has high representation from the socialists in Germany. This is a pro-European government. It's a government with a huge responsibility against the backdrop of these challenging times. And the SPD is aware of this huge responsibility. We hope and expect that this won't just be good news for Germany, but also we hope that this will be good news for Europe. Now, moving on to matters at hand, I want to address a few issues, and then after that, we're happy to open a Q&A round. I'd like to start with the issue of this committee of inquiry into NGOs. On Thursday, the COP will decide on this proposal from 200 MEPs on this establishment of a committee of inquiry into financial entities relating to Green Deal. We stand against the idea of holding NGOs responsible for this, because there's no reason for investigating behaviour from NGOs. Those who are making this attempt is to misuse the instruments within the European Parliament, and it's just one more strategy in this battle to distort the work of NGOs, and it's not an attempt to increase transparency in European Union decision-making. However, we are in favour of full transparency, of course, when it comes to the use of EU funds and beneficiaries, particularly when it comes to private entities. But this proposal for a mandate doesn't talk about that. It just talks about NGO management of funds. There's no need. They don't talk about transparency within private entities and lobbies that might have relationships with different MEPs and groups. Why just be transparent with NGOs? Well, this is a clear attempt to attack civil society and one of the fundamental pillars of our democracy. As such, the group's position will be clear and firm on this matter. Moreover, I want to recall that there is a more adequate body to look into alleged cases of misuse and corruption. For example, the EU ethics body, the interinstitutional ethics body that would cover all of the different EU institutions. But the EPP and the far right are standing in the way of the establishment and funding of this body. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how bodies such as the EU ethics body can be allowed to carry out that work. So I think that's a fundamental issue. Of course, there are other key priorities for us. MFF, the long-term revamped budget for the EU in a changing world. We have managed to strike a good agreement at committee level. It's a proposal that involves new sources of funding and also joint borrowing. That's a key topic for us. And this sets the foundations for a more competitive, resilient Europe while also preserving social justice. A budget that talks about childcare, child guarantee, and this is thanks to the S&D Group's work. I'd like to thank Clara Tavares, our co-rapporteur on this file. I'd like to ask the groups to be responsible, and this compromise that was struck at committee level needs to be agreed at plenary level. We shouldn't enter into the submitting an agreement on amendments that might seek to break the agreement that was struck. And then finally, a few quick points relating to urgency procedures. This week we will see different urgencies voted on in plenary, and it seems that this is becoming normal practice. I'd like to highlight that last week in the COP, and when I spoke to von der Leyen, I mentioned how concerned our group is when it comes to the risk of misusing Article 170, Rule 170, and Article 122 of the TFEU. We need to base ourselves on adequate justification on the need to apply these rules. Abusing and misusing this practice reduces the Parliament's influence as co-legislator, and as such, we have requested an appropriate debate on that topic. Of course, sometimes there are urgent issues, and there we understand why the Parliament needs to trigger the urgency procedure, but there are other files where we have serious doubts about whether they are urgent and whether, in fact, perhaps the attempt might just be to curb this Chamber's democratic power. And finally, for those of you I won't see, I want to wish you a happy Europe Day. We're celebrating the 75th year of the Schuman Declaration, which was a fundamental text seeking to boost integration and to set up common values. That's a call to go back to the ideas of our founding fathers and founding mothers. So today and this year, above all, I want to call on this fight that we need to continue fighting, and thank you very much.